It's 3 a.m. in the middle of the ocean. On a ship longer than the Empire State Building is tall, 5,000 people are asleep, stacked 3 bunks high in the dark. Above them, on a steel roof lit by amber floodlights, jets are still landing. A 30-ton aircraft slamming down every 90 seconds. Below them, 2 nuclear reactors are quietly turning seawater into drinking water. And somewhere in between, in a kitchen that never fully closes, cooks are already firing up breakfast for 18,000 meals a day. This is a floating city that never sleeps, never docks, and never runs out. A United States aircraft carrier. 333 meters of steel, 100,000 tons, home to more people than most small towns. And every single one of them has to eat, wash, and sleep here, sometimes for 9 months without touching land. But this kind of life is not free, and the ocean has collected on it before. July 29, 1967, the Gulf of Tonkin, off the coast of Vietnam. On the flight deck of the carrier USS Forrestal, aircraft are being armed for a morning strike. At 10:51 a.m., a stray electrical surge fires a rocket across the crowded deck. It tears into a parked jet, ruptures its fuel tank, and a river of burning aviation fuel spreads across the steel in seconds. The firefighting crew rushes in, and then the first 1,000-pound bomb cooks off and kills almost all of them. By the time it's over, 134 sailors are dead. It's the worst thing to happen to a U.S. carrier since the Second World War, and it happened not in battle, but during an ordinary morning aboard. That is the paradox of this machine. It is a small town, and it is a bomb, and the same 5,000 people have to live an ordinary human life inside it. Sleep, shower, share a meal, surrounded by jet fuel, live weapons, and 1,000 miles of empty sea. Today we're going inside that life. How they get fresh water. How they cook 18,000 meals a day. Where 5,000 people actually sleep. And how you take a shower when you're standing on a machine that can't afford to waste a single drop. But the most important part comes at the end, because there is one system on this ship, not the reactors, not the weapons, that if it quietly failed would empty the entire vessel of 5,000 people in under a week. It runs day and night. Almost nobody thinks about it, and it is the real reason human beings can live out here at all. Watch to the end. That's where the answer is. Start with the thing your body forgets to be grateful for. On land, staying alive is almost automatic. Turn a tap, water comes out. Open a door, there's air. Get hungry, there's a store. Out here, none of that exists. The nearest land can be 1,000 miles away. The ocean underneath is undrinkable. Swallow enough seawater, and it will kill you faster than drinking nothing at all. There is no ground to grow food, no well to dig, no grid to plug into. So a carrier can't just be a warship. It has to be a life support machine first. Before it can launch a single aircraft, it has to solve the same 4 problems your city solves for you every day without you noticing. Water, food, sleep, and sanitation. Except it has to do all of it for 5,000 people, at once, while moving, while under pressure, and with no resupply truck coming. And the scale of 5,000 is easy to say and hard to feel. Picture a full commercial airliner, around 200 people. Now line up 25 of those planes and pour everyone onto one ship. That's the population living inside this hull. A small floating town, complete with its own hospital, its own police, its own post office, its own church services, its own TV station, and one very busy barber shop that cuts around 1,500 heads of hair every single week. Now let's walk through how a town like that stays alive. We'll start with the one thing it can't fake. On a modern nuclear carrier, fresh water doesn't come aboard. It's made aboard from the same seawater that would poison you. Deep below the waterline, the ship runs its own water factories, distilling plants and reverse osmosis units that pull in ocean water, strip out the salt, and turn it into water pure enough to drink, cook with, and shower in. A Nimitz-class carrier can produce roughly 400,000 gallons of fresh water a day. That's about 1.5 million liters, enough to fill more than half an Olympic swimming pool every 24 hours, out of nothing but the sea. And here's the detail most people never think about. The crew is not even the biggest customer. The reactors need ultra-pure water for their cooling loops. The catapults that fling aircraft off the bow are steam-powered, and steam is just water that's been boiled and spent by the ton on every launch. So that 400,000 gallons a day get split 3 ways. The machines that move the ship, the machines that launch the planes, and the 5,000 humans who need to drink and wash. On a busy day, the humans are last in line. That's why, even on a ship that makes its own water, sailors are trained from day one never to waste it. And that training has a name, but we'll come back to it, because it's the key to the mystery from the start. Now the part everyone can relate to. 5,000 people get hungry 3, 4, 5 times a day. Feeding them is not cooking. It's logistics on a scale that would break most restaurants on Earth. A U.S. carrier serves somewhere between 17 and 18,000 meals a day. Read that again, not 18,000 meals on a holiday. 18,000 meals every day, day after day, for months. To do that, the galley's almost never close. Breakfast rolls into lunch, lunch into dinner. And then, for the thousands of sailors working through the night, there's a fourth meal in the small hours the Navy calls midrats, midnight rations. There is quite literally no hour of the day when someone on this ship is not being fed. The numbers behind that are staggering. Over a long deployment, a single carrier will go through millions of pounds of food. Thousands of pounds of chicken, beef, potatoes, and fruit disappear in a single day. The freezers and dry storage rooms are the size of warehouses, and loading them before a deployment is its own operation. Pallet after pallet craned aboard for days, because once the ship leaves, the pantry is closed. Whatever you didn't bring, you don't eat. And not everyone eats in the same room. A carrier has several separate dining areas. The enlisted mess decks where most of the crew eats cafeteria style, the chief petty officer's mess, and the officer's wardroom with sit-down service. On the older ships, the enlisted lines could get long enough that a sailor might spend a good chunk of a short meal break just waiting to be fed. On the newest carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, the Navy redesigned the whole system. Fewer but larger, smarter galleys, faster serving lines, specifically so a sailor can get in, get fed, and get back to work without losing half an hour standing in line. On a ship where time is the one thing nobody has enough of, the speed of a lunch line is treated as a serious engineering problem. Here's the detail that stays with you. For most of these sailors, many of them 19, 20, 21 years old, thousands of miles from home, the mess deck is the closest thing to a town square they've got. It's where you hear the news, where you see your friends, where you feel, for 20 minutes, like a person instead of a job title. On a machine built for war, the most important room might be the one with the trays. So you've eaten. Now where do you sleep? This is where the size of the ship stops helping you. A carrier is enormous on the outside and unbelievably tight on the inside, because almost all of that space is spoken for. Hangars, fuel, weapons, machinery, the reactors. Human beings get what's left, and what's left is the berthing compartment. Picture a windowless room, deep in the hull, packed with bunks stacked 3 high. These aren't beds the way you think of a bed. Sailors call them racks or coffin racks, and the nickname is honest. Each one is a mattress the length of a person, with just enough headroom above it to roll over, not enough to sit up straight. Your entire personal world on this ship fits into that rack and the shallow storage tray underneath it. A few uniforms, a phone, some photos, whatever fits. A single privacy curtain is the only door you get. Now stack that reality with the fact that the ship never stops. Carriers run around the clock in shifts, so at any hour, one sailor is climbing into a rack, while the sailor beside them is climbing out to go on watch. The lights in the berthing stay dimmed red, so the off-shift crew can sleep while the working shift moves through. You learn to sleep through the sound of jets catapulting off the deck directly over your head, a bang, and a shudder that runs through the whole ship every 90 seconds for hours. New sailors swear they'll never sleep through it. Within a week, most of them can't stay awake for it, and the scale detail here is quietly astonishing. The steel roof you're sleeping under is a flight deck of about 4.5 acres, 3.5 football fields of open runway. 30-ton aircraft are landing on it, catching an arrestor wire that stops them from over 100 miles an hour to zero in about 2 seconds, a few dozen feet above the compartment where you're trying to get 5 hours of sleep before your next watch. You are, in the most literal sense, sleeping underneath an airport. Which brings us to the question in the title, and the one that surprises people most. How do you take a shower on a machine that guards every drop of water like ammunition? The answer is a ritual. Every sailor learns in their first days aboard. The Navy shower. It works like this. You step in, you get wet, and then you shut the water off. You soap up and scrub with the water completely off. Then you turn it back on just long enough to rinse. Total water running, often under 2 minutes. Compare that to a normal shower back home, which can run 5, 10, 15 minutes and pour dozens of gallons down the drain. A Navy shower can use a small fraction of that. The opposite, standing there with the hot water running the whole time. The way you do at home has a nickname too. Sailors call it a Hollywood shower. And depending on the ship and the water situation, taking one can range from mildly frowned upon to a genuine offense. Because here's the logic. Every extra gallon a sailor lets run down the drain is a gallon the water plants have to remake from seawater, and a gallon the reactors and catapults might have needed. On a floating city, a long hot shower isn't a small indulgence. It's the whole town's problem. And sanitation runs on the same unforgiving math. Everything 5,000 people flush and drain has to be collected, treated, and dealt with on board. You can't simply dump it into the sea wherever you please. The ship carries its own sewage and wastewater treatment systems, its own laundry running around the clock to wash mountains of uniforms and linens, its own trash and recycling operation, compacting and storing waste until it can be properly offloaded. Nothing just goes away out here. Everything a town normally hides underground or trucks out of sight, this ship has to carry with it, treat, and account for, while doing everything else at the same time. Now, the part almost no one aboard actually sees. All of this, the water, the meals, the showers, the laundry, the lights in the berthing, traces back to a space deep in the heart of the ship that most of the crew is never allowed to enter. The reactor spaces. 2 nuclear reactors sit shielded behind steel and concrete near the bottom of the hull. They are the reason the whole floating city works. They spin the turbines that drive the ship. They make the steam that powers the catapults. They generate the electricity for 18,000 meals, for 5,000 people's air conditioning, for the freezers and the water plants and the red nightlights over the racks. And they can do it for around 20 years before the ship needs to refuel, meaning a carrier can, in theory, circle the planet again and again without ever stopping for fuel. The people who tend that heart live a strange, invisible life. They work in tightly controlled spaces most of their shipmates will never glimpse, keeping the reactors running perfectly so that everyone above them can do something as ordinary as brush their teeth or heat up a tray of food. The whole point of this machine, 5,000 people launching jets at sea for months, rests on a room that hums quietly in the dark, and that most of the crew will spend an entire deployment never seeing. So let's go back to the promise from the start. There's one system on this ship that, if it quietly failed, would empty the whole vessel in under a week. It's not the reactors. It's not the weapons, it's the fresh water. Here's the honest math. A human being can go weeks without food if they have to. Without water, in a hot steel hull with no natural cooling, you have days, not many. The ship can carry enough food for months, frozen and stacked in warehouses below. But it cannot carry months of water for 5,000 people. There isn't room, and the reactors and catapults would drink it anyway. So the ship doesn't store its water. It makes it, continuously, every hour of every day. And it can only stay ahead of demand as long as those distilling and reverse osmosis plants keep running. That's why the whole ship is built around not wasting a drop. It's why a shower is 2 minutes of running water instead of 10. It's why Hollywood shower is almost an insult. And it's why, when the water plants can't keep up, a breakdown, heavy demand, reactors needing more than usual, the ship declares what sailors call water hours. The showers get shut off, the laundry stops. Sometimes even the tap gets rationed to certain hours of the day. 5,000 people ration every drop until the plants catch up. That's the whole answer to the question from the start. This machine can survive a lot. It can take a fire, absorb a hit, run for 20 years without refueling. But the thin, invisible thread that actually lets human beings live out here isn't the steel or the reactors or the weapons. It's a handful of water plants humming below the waterline, quietly performing the one trick the ocean refuses to do for you: turning poison into something you can drink. Stop that, and the strongest warship ever built becomes uninhabitable in days. Step back and look at what this really is. We tend to describe an aircraft carrier by its weapons, the jets, the range, the firepower. But strip all that away, and what's left is stranger, and in a way more impressive. A machine whose first and hardest job is simply to keep 5,000 ordinary people alive, fed, clean, and rested in a place that offers them nothing. No water, no food, no ground, no air but salt and sea. And that's the pattern behind almost everything humans build at the edge of what's possible. We don't conquer these places by becoming tougher than them. We conquer them by carrying our entire civilization with us. The kitchen, the bed, the shower, the water, the small ordinary comforts of a town, packed into steel and hauled out to where we were never meant to survive. The Forrestal's crew learned the hard price of that in a single morning. The 5,000 asleep in their racks tonight are living the quieter version of the same bargain. An ordinary life, in an impossible place, held together by systems most of them will never think about. So the next time you turn on a tap and drink without a second thought, remember that somewhere out on the ocean right now, 5,000 people are counting every drop of theirs. And there's a machine below the waterline, making sure the count never hits zero. If you want to see more of how the biggest machines on Earth keep human beings alive inside them, subscribe. There's a whole fleet of these stories left to explore.